There comes a moment in every great journey when progress becomes pressure. When the dream is no longer private, and the consequences are no longer quiet. In the previous episodes, we watched ambition take form. We saw bold ideas, early risks, and the courage to step into uncertainty. But episode 5 begins where inspiration ends, and responsibility begins. This is the stage where belief is tested by reality. Where expectations multiply. Where the margin for error disappears. Here, every decision matters. Every delay is noticed. And walking away is no longer a simple choice. This is not the episode of beginnings. This is the episode of endurance. Because when everything is on the line, motivation is not enough. Confidence is not enough. Only clarity, discipline, and the willingness to carry the weight forward can sustain you. In this episode, we step into the pressure. The public scrutiny. The moments where doubt whispers loudly, and quitting feels close. This is episode 5. Everything on the line. Episode 5 begins the moment struggle stops being invisible. Until now, the weight had been internal, felt but unseen. But this phase exposed everything. Decisions were no longer happening quietly. Delays were no longer private. The pressure moved from the mind into the world. This is the shift most people are unprepared for. When your dream is no longer just yours. When other people's expectations attach themselves to your outcomes. When failure doesn't just hurt, it echoes. Elon had reached a point where every move was being watched. Not celebrated, but monitored. Progress was expected. Results were assumed. And patience was limited. This kind of pressure doesn't shout. It stares. It waits. It demands performance without offering reassurance. What once felt like personal ambition had become collective risk. And that changes how you breathe. How you sleep. How you decide. This is where the fantasy of entrepreneurship collapses. Because now, walking away doesn't just affect you. It affects everyone who believed enough to follow. Episode 5 opens here, where responsibility is no longer optional, and the cost of failure becomes visible to the world. Expectations are heavier than doubt. Doubt leaves room for possibility. Expectations assume results. And once expectations form, silence feels like failure. Elon carried expectations from every direction. From those who believed. From those who questioned. From those who invested time, energy, and trust. Each expectation tightened the margin for error. This is the paradox of progress. The further you go, the less freedom you have to fail quietly. Every setback feels amplified. Every delay feels suspicious. And the pressure to appear confident grows, even when certainty is gone. What makes this stage dangerous is not criticism, it's assumption. The world assumes you know what you're doing. That you've calculated every outcome. That confidence equals control. But behind that assumption was a man still navigating uncertainty in real time. Still solving problems that had no clear answers. Still carrying risk that couldn't be fully shared. This segment reveals a truth few talk about: expectations don't wait for readiness. They arrive early. And once they do, retreat becomes complicated. Backup plans provide psychological relief. They soften risk. They offer escape. But here, the backup plan was gone. Elon had crossed a point of no return, not because success was guaranteed, but because retreat no longer felt honest. Too much had been committed. Too many bridges crossed. Too much identity invested. This is where fear sharpens. Not because failure is certain, but because there is no alternative path that feels aligned. You're not choosing between options anymore. You're choosing whether to stand by what you've built. This is a dangerous place psychologically. Because safety nets don't exist here. Only commitment does. Episode 5 slows down here deliberately. Because this is the moment many people misinterpret as recklessness. But it isn't. It's coherence. When your actions, values, and direction have merged so fully that turning back would fracture who you are. This is not confidence. It's consequence. Risk is only celebrated after it works. Before that, it's questioned. Judged. Sometimes mocked. Elon stood in that gap, between action and validation. Taking risks that made sense internally but looked irrational externally. Betting on outcomes that hadn't yet earned trust. This is the loneliest kind of risk. The kind taken without applause. Without reassurance. Without certainty that anyone will understand, even later. Every decision now carried reputational weight. If it failed, it wouldn't just be wrong. It would be remembered. This segment focuses on the courage required to act without narrative protection. To move forward without knowing whether history will be kind. Uncertainty isn't just intellectual. It's physical. It affects how you sleep. How you eat. How you process time. Elon lived inside unanswered questions. Problems that refused to resolve quickly. Timelines that slipped. Variables that couldn't be controlled. The hardest part wasn't uncertainty itself, it was sustaining clarity within it. Making decisions without complete information. Acting without guarantees. This is where many people freeze. Because uncertainty feels like danger. But progress requires movement through unclear terrain. Episode 5 honors this invisible courage. The ability to continue without certainty, not blindly, but deliberately. When pressure becomes public, privacy disappears. Every stumble feels exposed. Every delay feels judged. Elon could no longer struggle quietly. The world was watching, sometimes closely, sometimes skeptically. Staying visible under pressure requires emotional discipline. You can't react to every opinion. You can't explain everything. This segment explores restraint. The ability to absorb noise without letting it steer decisions. Because visibility amplifies both praise and criticism, and neither should drive the mission. Doubt without urgency can linger. Doubt with deadlines demands answers. Time was no longer flexible. Decisions had to be made. Paths chosen. Consequences accepted. This is where doubt becomes useful, or destructive. Either it sharpens focus or paralyzes action. Elon learned to treat doubt as data, not instruction. This segment shows how pressure refines thinking when panic is resisted. Responsibility without control. Responsibility often arrives before control. You're accountable for outcomes you can't fully manage. Elon carried responsibility for factors beyond his command. External forces. Technical challenges. Human variables. This is where leadership matures. When you stop expecting control and start managing response. When adaptability replaces rigidity. The silence between decisions. Not every crisis is loud. Some are quiet. Long stretches where nothing resolves. Where waiting is the hardest work. This segment sits in that silence. The emotional toll of delayed outcomes. The discipline of patience under pressure. Why quitting still tempted him. Even now, quitting resurfaced. Not as fear, but as fatigue. The desire for rest. For relief. This segment explores the difference between wanting rest and wanting escape, and why confusing them is dangerous. Choosing meaning over relief. Relief is immediate. Meaning is delayed. Elon chose meaning. Not because it was easier, but because it lasted longer. This is where commitment becomes identity. The psychological line crossed. There is a moment when retreat stops feeling like an option. Not impossible, but misaligned. Elon crossed that line here. Truly on the line. Now, everything mattered. Outcomes would ripple outward. Success or failure would be visible. This is the peak of tension. Holding the line. This segment is about holding steady under maximum pressure. Not accelerating. Not retreating. Holding. What episode 6 will reveal. Episode 5 ends without release. Because release hasn't arrived yet. In episode 6, the consequences of these choices will surface. Results will appear. And the story will shift, from survival to judgment. This is Billionaire Backstories. Because before the breakthrough, there is a moment where everything is on the line. Episode 5 ends without celebration, because real turning points rarely announce themselves. Here, no victory is declared. No failure is confirmed. Only choices remain. The pressure has peaked. The risks have been taken. And the consequences are no longer theoretical. What happens next will not be decided by intention, but by outcome. Because there is a moment in every extraordinary story where survival alone is not enough. Where the world begins to measure results. Where belief must confront reality. Episode 5 was about holding the line. Standing firm when retreat felt reasonable. Choosing meaning over relief. But in the next chapter, the results of those choices will surface. In episode 6, we will see what pressure produces. What endurance reveals. And whether the risks taken here lead to collapse, or breakthrough. This is Billionaire Backstories. Because before the world calls it success, there is always a chapter where everything is on the line. Before the world knew his name, there was silence. Before the billions, there was brokenness. This is where the story began. Episode 1 took us to the moment everything fell apart, when Elon Musk had no safety net, no applause, and every reason to quit. It wasn't a story of success, but of endurance. Of choosing to stay when walking away felt logical. In episode 2, we went deeper, into childhood. Into loneliness, rejection, and pain. We saw how isolation shaped a mind that learned to escape into books, ideas, and futures no one else could see. The scars didn't weaken him. They sharpened him. Episode 3 revealed the cost of vision. The loneliness of thinking differently. The discipline required to chase problems bigger than yourself. It showed us that progress doesn't come with comfort, and clarity often arrives through struggle. By episode 4, risk had turned real. Decisions carried weight. Failure was no longer theoretical. Every move demanded commitment, sacrifice, and the courage to act without guarantees. This was the phase where belief had to stand without validation. And then came episode 5, where everything was on the line. Pressure became public. Expectations grew heavy. Quitting felt tempting, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Yet endurance won. Meaning was chosen over relief. These episodes remind us of one truth. Before the breakthrough, there is a stretch of uncertainty no one applauds. Before success, there is a chapter where only persistence speaks. This is Billionaire Backstories. Because before the billion, there is a story worth understanding. Episode 1 taught us that success doesn't begin with confidence, it begins with endurance. When everything fell apart, the real victory was choosing not to quit. Episode 2 revealed that pain can become preparation. Loneliness, rejection, and misunderstanding didn't break the vision, they shaped it. The lesson: your scars may be training you for something bigger. Episode 3 showed us the cost of thinking differently. Vision is often lonely, and progress rarely feels comfortable. The lesson: clarity often comes after isolation, not before it. Episode 4 reminded us that risk becomes real when action replaces ideas. There are moments when belief must stand without validation. The lesson: Growth requires courage before results. Episode 5 brought everything to the edge. Pressure became public. Expectations became heavy. Quitting felt tempting. The lesson: when everything is on the line, meaning must be chosen over relief. Together, these episodes reveal one truth. Before the breakthrough, there is a season that tests who you are. This is Billionaire Backstories. Because before the billion, there is a lesson worth learning. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not.